essences of nature itself.
What a strange person.
Unbelievably powerful supercomputer that's running our reality, and we don't have a clue as to how to operate it.
So when maybe you or somebody else creates an AGI system and you get to ask her one question, what would that question be? What's outside the simulation?
Say in your mind, say to yourself, I am more than my physical body, because I am more than physical matter. I can perceive that which is greater than the physical world.
Welcome to Lighting the Void.
Broadcasting live from Daytona Beach Shores, this is Lighting the Void, and I'm your host, Joe Roop. We are live on KTLK Digital Broadcasting, Fringe.fm. It is Monday. The moon is getting close to being full on this Monday, Moon Day night, March the 14th on into the 15th, as we had late into the deep night. I want to thank Michael Strange for bringing it. And then after the show, I think if you're on the Pacific, this thing goes to 1 a.m. And if you're on the East Coast, it goes to 3, maybe 4 a.m. 6 hours of Fringe late night. I'm your host, though, Joe Roop. This is Lighting the Void. Tonight, we're bringing back Thomas Gorence from ParanoidAmerican.com. Last time I talked to him with Owen Hunt, but I like the guy so much, I just wanted to talk to him personally. And I want to thank everybody that's been sending in their donations, no matter big or small. You guys, Joe, thank you so much. You guys you're making all the difference here, actually doing that. So thank you. And I have to remind you guys too, because people are already buying tickets to the event, the Contact to the Cabin event next year, February 2023, is going to be at Mount Shasta. People are already putting their deposits down. And we had such a hell of a time at this small event. I can't imagine, because this one's going to be bigger. It's going to be at Mount Shasta. And it's kind of one of those things. I mean, maybe not for you, but for me, I can tell you that it was one of those things, those type of life events that you have, and where after you leave, you don't realize how life-changing or how good of a time it was till later, right? That's how you know when you had a good time, at least for me, if you know what I'm talking about. But come out, though, if you want to hang out with us. You got plenty of time to buy a ticket. There's still a few tickets left, but grab it. You can go to contactthecabin.com, lightingthevoid.com. Just click on events. And, yeah, it's cool to hang out with these guys. They're going all over the world right now, so I'm jealous. They're going to Egypt, everywhere. If you want to call in, you can at 1-800-588-0335. We usually open the phone lines up after the first break. And you can join our Discord chat if you'd like to do that as well by going to fringe.fm and then just click on the Discord banner or go to fringe.fm/chat. We have like 500 people in there, but 10 people chat. It's really crazy. We're just inundated with stuff, I guess, so much. And there's so many Discord chat rooms, you don't know where to chat anymore, but it's fine. You know, I'd rather talk to you anyway, so call in. Good God, the energy's been crazy lately. I might bring up some crazy news today, but I think we got enough crazy news from Thomas Gorence, who's here with us from ParanoidAmerican.com. I got some comic books and stickers, man. I felt like a kid again, but then as soon as I started reading the books, you know, it brought up a lot of questions, brother. So thank you for coming back on the show.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Happy Moon Day.
Yeah, Moon Day it is, right? Moon Day it is. So you sent me a copy of Time Samplers, issue 1, and it brought back all the old memories of comic books. And speaking of which, they're making that Morbius comic book I was telling you about. It's going to come out, I think it's on my birthday, April the 1st, but it's, you know, Morbius was the first comic book that slightly scared me a little bit when I read it. And then
I'm excited about this. He had a badass design too.
Yeah. And now the when I looked at the preview today, I was like, damn, yeah, that looks just like the comic, as sick as it looks, you know? So, but I was reading the comic book, Time Samplers, and you talk about Alexander Bell in here, and it's just interesting, some of the stuff, because you think, okay, we're going to talk all of conspiracies, and we're going to get into that too, but I had no idea this guy was a nudist at all. You know?
That's one of the least surprising things about his life.
Really?
And a really quick nod, that wasn't just kind of randomly come across. Have you ever heard the name James Shelby Downard?
Yeah, I've heard it. I have.
So James Shelby Downard, I think, is a little bit more well known for his theory King Kill 33, and he kind of posited that the JFK assassination was part of this magic ritual, and it was kind of like a death sacrifice, and a lot of the occult symbolism that went along with the street names and the time of day and everything else. So James Shelby Downard claims that since he was a little kid, he had been keeping a journal of all these crazy experiences that he had had. And I think it goes back to when he was like, 8 or 12 years old or something. And I believe it was published under the name The Carnivals of Life and Death. This was the name of sort of his collection of writings. And one of those stories, he claims, and this is nonfiction in the terms of James Shelby Downard at least, that his mom brought him to Jekyll Island in Georgia, and that while he was there, Alexander Graham Bell was also staying there, and they were performing all kinds of like sex right magic rituals on some guy that was like an unwitting victim essentially, and that a lot of that involved the nudism. So I'm reading this and I'm keeping a grain of salt as I'm reading through all of it. But as I look up, who was actually there, was Alexander Graham Bell actually at Jekyll Island? And turns out, yeah, he absolutely was. If you ever go to Jekyll Island, they actually have a picture of Alexander Graham Bell making the first transcontinental phone call in history. And they've got the phone there in like a little glass case at Jekyll Island commemorating it. And then I found out that he was in fact a nudist. So it just felt like one of those things that had to become a focal point in the very first issue about the Federal Reserve, which was the other thing that happened at Jekyll Island.
Yeah, this is really cool because you take all the interesting stuff about him, about how he's fascinated with sheep skulls and sound and tuning forks and all this stuff, and then turn it into like how, because I was talking to Anthony about this last week, how psychotic are some of these people? I'm not saying they are, right? Like, but if you get to really looking into it, it definitely could, but they could have a form of psychosis, right? And
we tend to look at their inventions and their success, right? So years later, we look at all these great advances in technology and medicine, but you don't ever really consider that a lot of experimentation is like the most crude process you can imagine. So a lot of like the animal experimentation stuff he was doing, this isn't like done in like a perfect lab, setting, just like the phone discovery that he kind of had. A lot of that was linked to his involvement in spiritualism and his belief that there was like this spirit energy that was transmittable. So the point here being is that we tend to think of these great inventions and these men hundreds of years later in a very clinical, sort of like high prestigious area, but really they were just kind of hackers, in the world that they had at the time.
Yeah. So this guy's almost, to me, we were talking about the Jonestown massacre too, and I start wondering too, because I'm like, man, I definitely talk about a lot of the same stuff these guys talk about, right? So you don't want to slip off into where you're telling people they're people of God and they gotta leave the planet, right? So it's time to get out of here because it's not so love and light. And I'm just saying, like, I've been thinking about a lot of stuff. I mean, a lot of stuff lately. And there's a lot of crazy energy going on around right now because if you think about just gossip in general, right, there's no way to know the truth about any of it unless you were there. Like, unless you were actually there, it could all just be hearsay and gossip, which is, to me, a tool of the devil.
Even if you were there, you only have, your own perspective on that. There's the analogy of the like 8 men, I'm going to butcher it, but like the 8 blind men that are feeling an elephant in the room and they're all trying to kind of explain what's in the room. One guy's got a hold of the tail and one guy's got a hold of the tusk and one guy's got his hand on the elephant's ass, and they're all describing completely different things. And to each of them, that's their objective reality, is whatever they're reaching out and feeling. But without all of them communicating with each other, they don't realize that there's an elephant in the room,
Yeah, so here's the thing, right? Since you talk about conspiracies and a lot more than I do, but you're also a Freemason. So you actually know, or maybe you have more of an idea, at what point is conspiracy real to the point, like, where's that line where we're starting to make up stuff, right?
My favorite analogy here is that technically your mom and dad planning a surprise party for you is a conspiracy. So with that being one far end of the mild side of the spectrum, all the way to, the P2 Black Masonic Lodge conspiracy, where there was actual evidence of government corruption and Freemasons, but really conspiracies are just something that's being planned outside, your purview, maybe not always for nefarious reasons, because nefarious automatically assumes some kind of moral judgment or something like that, whereas a lot of the time there's kind of like this objective process that's in flow.
Yeah, so that's a really good answer, right? But I'm sure people come to you and they go, okay, Thomas, like, what is real about Freemasonry as far as the conspiracies go, and what isn't? You know what I mean? And like, you can't, and I bet that's a tough question for you, right? Because you can't, I'm sure there's certain things that you could talk about that get construed as bad or good or however you judge them. But then at the same time, like, I think a lot of us are trying to figure this out. Like, what is really, how do I say this? Bad in conspiracy, right? Because like you said, conspiracies are conspiracies. We know
if you're trying to make a moral
Ultra
judgment, like, what's the actual bad version of that? So I'll give you some practical examples, right? So modern day Freemasonry, an example of a bad outcome of this, and I'm not going to get into like the reptilian queen and assassination plots worldwide, but in a very practical day-to-day Freemasonic sort of dynamic, you could have, and this happened to someone I was talking to recently, but you can have a small town and there's not a lot of jobs open up, and a job opens up. And if the company that's hiring, the hiring manager happens to be a Freemason and knows that another Freemason is applying, there's a very good chance that they might have some kind of bias and they will get hired over anyone else. And this is a real dynamic that you can extrapolate into way more walks of life than just applying for a job, applying for a loan, applying for almost anything, because the original Freemasons were sort of this insider club to just give preference to each other in many aspects of life. And I think that over time and over the last couple hundred years, that's become a little bit outdated, because now there's so many other social clubs. There's, you can just join like a Facebook group or a think tank group, and that largely replaces the entire need for Freemasonry. So that networking and like backroom deals, secret handshake aspect of Freemasonry, I personally believe has been largely, displaced by internet and technology and Zoom meetings. However, there's this whole other aspect of Freemasonry, and it was one of the few clubs you could join that people were interested in talking about things like the liberal arts and the trivium and quadrivium and sort of like deeper philosophical topics combined with a cult without getting a little bit too far into the new age woo-woo sort of approach, which was also very prevalent in the early 1900s. So it was sort of a place you could go that people would, take these kind of topics a lot more serious than just reading about it in the paper and as like a novelty. So that was kind of this two-pronged approach to it. So I think modern day Freemasonry has a lot less of that secret, backroom handshake deals going on, and a lot more of people that are focused on sort of this arcane knowledge that not a lot of other people are interested about.
Oh, well, the reason why I say that is because it scares me a little bit how it doesn't scare me, but I think we're I don't know if our mind has such a fascination with it. I've gotten to this point where, and maybe you can help me with this because I don't want to offend anybody, but there's real conspiracies, right? And then there's what seems to be a heavy ass victim mentality that's almost fascinated with being the victim, right? And so, and I've witnessed this myself in my own community. I'm not going to lie.
The all-encompassing they are always working against you, right?
Or even me. Like I've had people say that I'm this or that or whatever, and it's like, and you're making all this shit up. You're watching people come to their own conclusions in their head that have nothing to do with the real truth, and they're so quick to jump all over it and then start spreading rumors. You see how fast things can happen, right? Like how this whole mentality can happen. And you have to experience it for yourself to actually see the mentality. Like, oh shit, this can be a form of psychosis in a way, if that makes sense,
Yeah. I mean, I've been accused of probably a lot of the same stuff that you've probably been accused of, MK Ultra agent and CIA plant and Freemason, although the latter I've got pegged. I sort of painted that own target on my own back.
Yeah. Or, so it's like this, like when someone says, if someone has their mind made up, and we can get into some philosophy here, that you're lying and they get there from a paranoid state of mind, what's to stop them? Because to me, in paranoia, like the paranoid people, and I'm not saying you're paranoid because you're definitely not, dude. You're a rational guy, right? But you also understand conspiracy and everything. But it seems like this mindset also needs validation. I'm talking immediately. I need it now. Validate what I'm thinking, validate my paranoia, validate my theories now immediately, and let's all talk about it,
Well, and also to clarify here, when we're talking about conspiracy theories, we're not talking about typically people getting worked up over something very milquetoast conspiracy. It's always at the extreme end of the spectrum. So when you're dealing with those extremes, you're at like this heightened level. You want, big claims and like big movies and proof, video proof.
Yeah.
And it's because you kind of get wrapped up in that whole spectacle of it. And it's hard not to, want to ask for that because that's kind of what the conspiracy world has sort of been like framed around. It's about these large traumatic moments, the 9/11s, the JFK assassinations, these big moon landings, things that impact pop culture in these significant ways. But that's, that's the 1% of the 1%. The real conspiracy theories are typically extremely boring. I've got a guy, Lenny Flatley, who wrote a book on the finders and actually did the legwork of going and tracking people down that were in the finders or had made claims about coming across the finders. And for anyone that's not familiar, the finders is this group from Washington, D.C. that is in the conspiracy world been linked to like child kidnapping rings and adrenochrome harvesting and, anything you can imagine is kind of tied up in this finders, Satan worship and animal sacrifice and everything. So Lenny goes and he interviews a lot of these people. And it turns out, there's some of the truth into like, you can see where those seeds got planted and the big rumors grew out of it. But he always reminds me that, when you actually start breaking these things down and talking to people and doing research, the large outlandish conspiracy theories usually become more and more boring. And there's a lot more of a human element where it's like, oh, okay, well, Maybe there weren't these like huge animal sacrifice rituals happening in underground tunnels, but there was an animal that was maybe field dressed in front of kids in a, which is just as questionable as doing like a full-blown satanic ritual, although the context makes it a lot different. And again, I always go back to like the blind men in the room feeling the elephant, right? Like on one end of the spectrum, you've got someone that's, these kids and they saw this animal being, killed and there was blood all over the place. And then another person that's like, yeah, well, I hunt with my kids all the time and they've seen me dress an animal in the field as well.
I mean, my son did when he was little. It kind of scarred him. I did when I was little,
And it's no less of a traumatic experience. And the same thing is happening, but once you start assigning, the intent to it, and I think that's kind of the crux of it, right? So from the outside, any conspiracy, you can list all the objective things happening and all the side effects, but once you start assigning intent and you claim to say like, well, I know why this person did this thing or why this group did this thing, that's when you're starting to get into an area that it's very much speculative. That's what you think is happening. And that doesn't, excuse anything that's happening, good or bad, but it just means that once people get into that sort of realm where they're assigning intent, then they're kind of talking out of their ass. They're assuming what they think is happening based on their limited outside perspective of it.
Right. And so but then again, you can't negate the bad things, right? Like human experimentation, MK Ultra, Montauk.
Well,
then you have,
absolutely not, because humans are fucking shitty, right?
Right, yeah. And so then
we do horrible things to ourselves and each other constantly. We don't need secret societies or conspiracies for that to happen. The conspiracies are typically involved in covering it up or facilitating it. Because
there is like so there is a modern era of, I would say, people that are they're really, we're all like focused on, who the perpetrator is. So it seems like someone's always looking for the perpetrator, right? It's the Bavarian Illuminati, it's the World Economic Forum, it's the Rothschilds, it's the Rockefellers, it's the fill in your own boogeyman sort of deal. And I want you to be happy and successful, and I support you. But if you get to a certain level, you're a government, or you're just like them, right? And it's like you have to, I'm sure, because your website, to me, like, dude, let's just put this on a smaller scale. Your website is, to me, is successful. You got a massive team of people, right? You've got all kinds of stuff going on. When you started this gig, think about this for a second. How many people were there that worked with you that came and left? How much drama was there? Was there any drama? Was there people that saw it blow up and got jealous? Was there people like, I'm just talking about, if we look at things on a microcosmic scale, we can see the power of the macrocosmic scale. You see what I mean?
Yeah, there's also a really interesting dynamic there where, when it first starts out for this, the website and my whole endeavor, but this applies to anyone.
Sure.
When first starting something out that's new and kind of unheard of, almost no one has as much interest, and they can't as much as you, because it hasn't really come to fruition yet, right? So like I sent you that Time Samplers comic. That was just this one story in the back of my head. But if you could imagine me trying to describe without having any visuals or a script, and I'm just sitting down like, hey, Joe, man, I've got this comic and it's going to have Alexander Graham Bell is going to be naked in it, but there's also going to be sheeple, but it's going to be kind of like a history lesson about how the Federal Reserve came to be in 1913. Oh yeah, it's a comic book, but there's no superheroes or no superpowers. There's no muscles. No one can fly. And then, like trying to get someone on board, there's a lot of just having to push through it. So that as this thing is growing, no one's going to have that vision except for, the person that's kind of pushing it through. And a lot of the original, teams that I came across and people I worked with, they didn't really see the vision. They were there because, I was paying a paycheck to, get the art done or get the writing done. It's only after a few of those issues come out and there's like a reception and people like it, then you start meeting people that are on board because they actually care about the story and they've got a vested interest in it. And I find that has been the truth in almost everything that I've ever done, is that, your first attempts, it's really hard to, at least for me, it's really hard to describe like what my end goal is. I kind of have to make it and then show someone that was the end goal. That's what I had in mind, the whole time.
Yeah.
And once you've got that as an example, then I can be like, okay, now I've got these 20 other ideas. And, now that I'm not completely crazy because I actually put that one over the finish line. Let's talk about these other 19.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, see, but I'm in my experience with just radio as a whole. I've seen some psychotic things happen. I don't want to say psychotic. I've seen conspiracies happen. I've seen people come up with their own conclusions. I've seen rumors get started. I've seen one person say something and 9 people get behind it, and then there's a whole mob of people that believe something that's totally not true.
Radio is a great example because of payola. And I don't know how prevalent it is now, but I remember in the early 2000s, there was this whole payola scandals breaking out left and right across a lot of the radio stations. Because right after I got out of the military, I was set on making music my career. And I worked with a bunch of radio stations, getting placement. And I was working with a lot of music retailers and trying to get music into stores and get other independent music into stores. And the whole concept of paying someone in order to get your music more successful than others in terms of airplay, in terms of getting it actually placed in store. That shit is all 100% real. There were times when I was in the studio and I literally heard someone, gift someone else jet skis and, prostitutes in order to get a famous artist to come to this city and do the show instead of to the other city. It was we wanted to get Nas to come to San Antonio instead of going to Houston for one leg of his tour. Well, all of a sudden, if his manager gets a couple free, Sea-Doos and some Coke, well, now he's coming to San Antonio. And that played out so frequently that it was just the cost of doing business in a way.
Yeah.
Now and when you've worked your way all the way into that kind of level and you see that happening on a daily basis, it doesn't feel as much like a conspiracy as much as a cost of operation. But you step back out to that wide-eyed, young kid that wanted to break into the music industry and, meet all your famous musicians. And then you tell them oh yeah, well, chances are a lot of that fame came because this manager bought this other manager a bunch of jet skis and blow. That sounds like this nefarious, dark conspiracy that's meant to keep, all of the people out that aren't willing to sacrifice their morals. But really it was, I don't know how else to describe it, where it's I don't think anyone sat down and yeah, we're going to design this whole music industry so that everyone's, greedy and they just do drugs and they just want to have fun. That's just kind of the natural evolution of, having all kinds of wealth and leisure just kind of cater to you.
Yeah. I like talking about conspiracy. I love it. It's one of my favorite topics, by the way. It's fun. But I think sometimes where we take the fun out of it is when we lose our rational mind or where we become super victimized or things like that, of that nature. But I want to look into this stuff because if you guys go to paranoidamerican.com, you can check out all the comic books, Paranoid American History, Time Sampler, Secret Mystery School. We're going to talk MK Ultra. We're going to ask some of the big questions here, especially to this guy that created these comic books, Thomas Gorence and his crew. We'll be right back. More Lighting the Void coming up. Stay with us. All right, I'm back, and I'm here with Thomas Gorence from Paranoid American, and I've been complaining to him during the break about how the podcasting world is just like it's like a microcosmic music industry world, and you can see it too, it's different in the podcast world because, I don't know, did you watch Kanye's Genius thing on Netflix yet?
I'm saving it for a special night, yeah.
So here's the thing that I've noticed, right? In the podcast world, everybody has this Kanye West vision of themselves. I'm not just saying that to be a dick, but it's true. The more you talk to people that do podcasts and stuff or radio shows or whatever, and I think you should have that mentality. Otherwise you're going to burn out anyways. But you're dealing with a lot of people that have this Kanye West great destiny mentality of their radio shows or podcasts, And then you kind of see what people are willing to do to get it, right? And I was watching this Genius thing. This is what made me think about all this. The Kanye West Genius thing, where he's just such massively into self-promotion. He's got this guy named Cootie doing his own, what do you call it? Documentary. And it really makes him look good, but then it shows the crazy side to him. And you watch him go from a normal, inspired dude that's kind of like, just thinks he's the biggest guy in the world to, he starts having psychotic breakdowns, right? He just starts breaking down because it's like all the voices in the industry start getting to him, you know? And then I started thinking about the conspiracy mentality and MK Ultra and the mind virus and things like that. And it's like, seriously, we've programmed people to become like, I don't know what it is. Like, even when we rise to a certain point, we'll start being hard on ourselves and we'll start bringing ourselves back down, you know?
Put some walls around that, because I think it's really about being conditioned to be reactionary to the extremes. So it's this pendulum swinging, and everyone's kind of conditioned, the all-encompassing they, but essentially just modern culture and the, online world and just everything that we kind of deal with tends to get reactions when you go to the extremes. So I think that's kind of where a lot of this kind of lives in. And once you start straying away from those extremes, you just don't get as much attention. So people are just naturally inclined to kind of hang out in those extremes.
Yeah, and the extremes, right? Yeah. So when we talk about the like, say, the checkerboard floor or the Masonic floorboard, and we discuss that, it's not as big as saying there's a grand conspiracy behind it of mental programming where they're trying to program you to be in a dual world where it's polarized and it's a evil thing. It's like, what if I'm just understanding the concept? You see what I mean? Like, there's a mentality of victimhood and there's a mentality of understanding.
Have you ever worked with anyone that's manic depressive, like legit manic depressive?
I think I have. I don't think they've gotten a real diagnosis, to be honest with you.
Because one, and I'm not a doctor, but I've worked with a few, and especially in the entertainment industry, it tends to attract people that live in those kind of extremes. And one of the interesting patterns that I pick up from this is I had a coworker that was definitely manic depressive, and for anyone that's not familiar with kind of what that means in sort of a layman's terms, it doesn't mean that you're like a crazy maniac and you're depressed. It's this operation between two extremes where on one end of the extreme, you might wake up for a week and not even want to get out of bed, and nothing's worth, getting out of bed for, and everyone's just going to not be impressed, and, such a disappointment, yada, yada, to one morning you wake up and you're like, I'm going to write a movie. I'm going to write a screenplay. Hell, I'm going to cast all these people. I'm going to, start all these projects. I'm going to plan a vacation. It goes to these massive extremes, and very little time is spent sort of like shooting for these huge goals or, being overly critical and then stepping back from it and trying to figure it out from like a more evened perspective. And I kind of think that in the conspiracy world, people are rewarded very much for kind of having not a medical manic depressive mentality, but sort of the same kind of dynamic where, either everything is pure good and I'm all for team A, or everything is pure bad. Now I'm against team B. It's partly from politics, but I think it's just like this human mentality to latch on to things at the extremes. Cause that's, it's like a roller coaster. People don't like the boring parts in between the ups and downs, they like getting pulled up because that anticipation, and then they like, being thrown down because of the adrenaline rush. But the little bits in between where you're just kind of like coasting, those are the boring parts that no one ever remembers when they go on the roller coasters,
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Right. Yeah. Like I don't know if it's a midlife crisis or whatever you want to call it, but I've got to the point in my life where I don't even have compassion for victim mentality. And I love talking about conspiracy, right? Like, I love talking about conspiracy. I love talking about stuff, right? Even when I tell people, hey, like, I'm struggling with this and I needed, this is something that I'm going through or whatever, people are like, I just want people to hear me out, right? But instead, it's like, no, it's like this misery loves company kind of thing. And then the conversation will meld into, well, it's someone bringing you down. Well, it's someone lying to you, or they deceived you, or they did this or that. And it's like, okay, well, I've had that happen in my life. And then when it's really happened in my life and I've told people about it, it's like, well, they don't believe you, you know, and it's like, what the hell? We're just compounded with so much illusion. I don't think we know what to believe anymore sometimes, if that makes sense, you know?
I mean, I think we're all just trying to make sense of everything on our own too. It's like, I fall into that same pattern where it's easy to get frustrated by victim mentality, but it's also extremely relatable. Like, I don't think there's a person on the planet that can't relate to that victim mentality. And I also think that it's most frustrating for, you know, people like you and me, because we might see, it might be a reminder of the victim mentality that we've got. You know, it reminds us when we see someone else being a victim, it reminds us the points in our lives when we kind of imagine ourselves being the victim and being kind of powerless. And to wrap this back to the Kanye, as funny as it is, I think that even despite any kind of like manic depressive where you might be depressed one day or the other, but the Kanye is such an interesting dynamic because he's like a power of nature, where even if everyone in his entire life is
that's what I respect
how
about
stupid
him.
Something is,
yeah,
it's just like this juggernaut that just keeps going forward, no matter what anyone says. And I want to really believe that there's, you know, thousands or tens of thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands of people out there like that maybe just haven't had monetary success. Maybe don't have a shoe company, and you know, maybe they're not dating or I was gonna say
Kim Kardashian,
you know, D-list celebrities, whatever.
Yeah,
maybe they're not in the public spotlight. But there's plenty of juggernauts out there that say, you know, screw anyone that doesn't kind of get this vision. I'm going to see it through regardless. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, those people never get credit. Some of them only get credit like 300 years after they've put out all of this work. You know what I mean? Where in their lifetime, it's kind of looked down on. So
I like, so there was this one thing, like I'm not afraid of confrontation, right? Which is, I think what one of the reasons why I love radio so much is good radio hosts aren't afraid of confrontation, right? So you hear a lot of radio hosts just agree with everybody all the time and build everybody's ego up. It gets boring after a while, right? But there's healthy confrontation, and there's people that just start fights, you know. There's healthy debate, and there's people that just like to be shitty. But I was watching when he was on his come up, and he came from Chicago. And as he got out of Chicago and things started happening, the people that were with this guy in the beginning started getting on the radio and turning against him, right? Like they were like, oh, Kanye disrespected me, and he did this and that. And he ain't said nothing but hugged him and was nice to him and thank you and all this other stuff, and was out there on the stage with him. But he was listening on the radio, and they're like, oh, he disrespected me. I don't think he's giving us enough credit. And and I'm like, damn, like this dude can't catch a break. Like he couldn't catch a break.
Rap especially, because I mean, if you ever gone to a rap show, you see like any large rapper's got an entourage that's like, you know, 15, 20 people deep. So it must be hard to start out small and have a huge entourage and then blow up, because everyone in that entourage thinks that they've got an equal part in, you know, that trajectory. And even if they do, it's just, you know, impossible for everyone to go along on that ride.
Yeah.
So everyone, you know, you're going to get a lot of hurt feelings and a lot of bruised egos in that process. It's just inevitable.
The one guy that did the documentary, Cootie, though, you could tell it was an emotional thing where he was like, I saw Kanye blowing up and he's living his dream, but we weren't close anymore or whatever. And you can tell like his whole focus was how close he was with Kanye, not Kanye's dream or whatever that he supported. But in the end, even the guy that did the documentary came around and he was like, I realized I don't care anymore. I got to witness someone, you know, like build their dream, right? And he started appreciating it for what it is instead of being butthurt over the fact that they weren't close anymore.
Stop making about himself,
right?
You know.
Right. Yeah, man.
And I mean, I haven't seen this series yet, but I can absolutely relate to, I guess, the premise already. But I would also say that, you know, whoever that guy fell in love with or whoever he lost connection with, that guy doesn't exist anymore. You know, once Kanye blew up to a certain level, that Kanye that he knew kind of ceased to exist. That was like the old shell, you know, the old
he's gone,
worn out cocoon, you know, like dude had, you know, transformed multiple times at that point. So
right,
he was never going to see that Kanye again ever.
So in the world of conspiracy, when we talk about spirituality, when we grow, I think it's only natural for us we grow one way or the other, right? I see people grow into bigger like victims, and then I see other people growing into it. And this includes me too. Like, oh, these are natural concepts that we can use to kind of understand nature and things more. It's not really, something that it is used against us, but not in the way, I don't think it's all used against us in the way that our minds are coming up with a lot of the times. And even when I read your comic books, there's so much information in there that has nothing to do with like the basics of, I guess you would say, conspiracy, like all of these interesting facts. You could see there's a lot of human crazy behavior and psychosis that's involved with all this stuff, like we're making up stories about lots of things, and we don't even consider the human factor of things or the craziness about humans most of the time.
Yeah. And one of the things I always allude to is that conspiracy theory, at least in the context of American conspiracy theories, I see it as modern day mythology. Because, if you look at old school mythology and religion, they were solely there to kind of explain the unknown, and specifically the things that came up often enough that, everyone wanted to know the answer to these questions. So there becomes this system that is set up to explain all of these unknown ideas. So this is kind of what conspiracy theories are meant to do. Conspiracy theory is there because there's an absence of information about it, forcing you to speculate on what the truth is. And that speculation tends to involve a lot of these kind of conspiracy theories.
Right. And I was also watching V for Vendetta the other day. It's one of my favorite movies. I'm sure it's a lot of people's favorite movies. And it plays to our emotions of, the power ruling the sheeple kind of thing, and then the sheeple fighting back. But the truth is like, I think we like the stories more than we actually like fighting back.
Yeah, of course.
You know what I mean?
They're these archetypes, these timeless tales, and storytelling is a lot like music as well, and a lot of other artwork where it's about setting expectations and then subverting those expectations and overcoming those expectations. Like a good musical composition, it kind of builds tension, and it knows when to release that tension and go back to a root note. And what's really happening in the mind of the listener is that they're kind of expecting the music to take a certain path, and when it takes a slightly different path, it interests you. But if it keeps taking these unexpected turns, it stops being kind of harmonic, and it's not as enjoyable of a listening experience. When it starts to like take a turn, returns back to that chorus that is real catchy, or it returns back to some little like riff that you knew was coming because you've heard it before, or you sort of anticipated it because of a few notes it played before. Once it starts playing the song that you wanted to hear, then it becomes this kind of a catchy tune. And I think this is the exact same thing for storytelling, where the person creating the story, whether it's an actual storyteller or whether it's a person analyzing something happening around them and creating that story for themselves, but you all kind of follow those same patterns of building up these expectations, subverting it, fulfilling them. And if you don't follow these very kind of tried and true patterns, it just kind of doesn't last the test of time as much as other things that do. So even when you've got like a completely legitimate sequence of events, those events over time, through storytelling and through people explaining to each other, it'll keep sort of fitting back into this template of storytelling that we're all used to.
Sure.
And it's, good or bad, but they all kind of start fitting the same mold. So you have to know what that mold is. You can kind of extract the information from it and put together the missing pieces on your own.
So being a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Freemason, right? What would you say through your journey? Well, I'll ask you two questions here. Through your journey of Freemasonry, was there like a big thing that you realized that we totally got wrong about conspiracy? Like, if there is, what would you say it is? And then I'm going to ask the opposite question.
I don't think so. Not necessarily. Because again, like me joining Freemasonry in, I think it was 2014 or 2015 or something. is nothing at all like joining Freemasonry in the 1700s or the 1800s. Could not be any different in terms of like the dynamic and the social context and everything.
Yeah.
So I do kind of feel like, and no disrespect to Freemasonry or any Freemasons listening to this, but I don't know if you've ever, this might be a real data reference, the store service merchandise or like Circuit City or something, right? So Circuit City was going out of business 2 decades ago or something.
The Radio Shack.
Radio Shack, right? You go into the store and it's got all of these great products that you're legitimately interested in being sold for, bargain basement prices. And you know that the only reason that you're even getting access to these products is because they're just fucking, hemorrhaging money and they just need to stay alive for just a little bit longer. So this is an overly dramatic explanation of modern day Freemasonry, but it's kind of on its like last dying leg. They're willing to, they're trying anything they can to kind of get like a new wave of new generation people in. So I definitely don't think like the bar for entrance is necessarily like lower, but the type of people that are joining it are most likely not the same type of people that were joining hundreds of years ago.
Well, you have to consider too, those guys hundreds of years ago were keeping secrets for a reason. One, because they could die. I mean, in certain situations, they literally could get killed. And, in other situations, like the United States of America, they were literally coming together to help build a new vision, of a country. So
yeah, that's overlooked so often, like especially in like the Scottish Rite lodges. For each degree in the Scottish Rite, there's like a flag and a whole set of symbolism and like colors and animals and things like this. And if you look back in like the early American history, there would be a lodge that would be set up, and based on the flag, I'm just kind of like paraphrasing and making some things up here to kind of illustrate an idea, because I don't have like a direct example. But let's say that there was one of the degrees in Scottish Rite Masonry was kind of about the concept of revenge. That was what that degree's kind of story was about. Well, you might find a lodge set up with those colors in that flag, and that might very likely have been an indication of like, oh, this is a lodge that's actually set up to take revenge in some political or some real world, event, maybe during like American Revolution times or something. So like those kind of things actually exist, and you could, if you had the eyes to see, you would kind of know that, oh, there's this utilitarian group that was set up, and that lodge might only exist for long enough for that operation to take place. Once the revenge has been addressed, the lodge completely dissolves like it never even existed. So there's definitely this concept of lodges being set up for specific purposes and only existing long enough for that purpose to come to completion and then going back away. And I don't think that exists at all necessarily anymore as it used to.
And the second question would be, did you realize that something was definitely real about conspiracy and Freemasonry? Like I didn't go into the Scottish Rite. Like I just did the 3 degrees of Blue Lodge stuff. And I found out some stuff that my state was doing back in Arkansas that I was like, this is not at all, what I was signed up for this for. Like they were voting out people in lodges and stuff just for being pagan, and people of certain, like Prince Hall Masons weren't recognized, all kinds of stupid stuff, dude. And I was
honestly,
like, I'm out.
There's a sordid here in the state of Florida, just this year, or it was like less than 12 months ago, Prince Hall Masonry became recognized as, non-clandestine masonry, meaning that it's now accepted in like the bigger body of masonry. However, it's so recent that like I can't just go and visit a Prince Hall lodge, and vice versa. They can't visit a non-Prince Hall lodge until after there's like all of this ceremonial bureaucratic, red tape where the grand worshipful master of the full Southern jurisdiction goes and meets with some grand master of the Prince Hall, and they have to do a secret handshake. And, it has to ripple out from there. until it finally hits these small lodges and little towns. And depending on the town you live in, they just might never accept Prince Hall Masons. And for any listeners, Prince Hall Masonry essentially is masonry that accepted African Americans, because regular masonry didn't until very, very recently. And I mean very recently as in maybe like the 90s, mid 90s or something like that. And it wasn't with a lot of fanfare. It was kind of just like, we're just going to pretend like this little bylaw never existed. And they just kind of crossed it out, you know?
Yeah. And that's what got me.
Of that still. And it sucks. I mean, yeah, like, I mean, I am a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason, but the more you look into the history, it is a very problematic history. And it's very hard to kind of discount some of it. So, yeah, it's not 100% benevolent history going all the way back by any means.
That's why when people say, man, they're taking over the world or whatever, I'm like, they're still back in the 50s trying to work stuff out. It looks like to me, you know, like they're still back in the 1900s trying to, in some places, still trying to work things out. Like, oh, so there's co-masonry. Well, we don't recognize co-masonry. Well, the Grand Lodge of France does. Well, we're from the Grand Lodge of England, so it doesn't matter. You know, like only the Grand Lodge of England is real masonry. The rest of y'all are just not. And then there's like even more clandestine stuff and all this other. And then it gets to the point where it's like, who's real? Like, what's real? Or, you know, like, is there a legitimate thing here? Or what are you guys fighting about? You're all teaching the same stuff, right? So that's kind of where
it's like any religious denominations, right? Where and it's funny because usually it has less to do with fighting over the fundamentals. It tends to focus on like these tiny little abstract details, and that's where you become splintered in all these different groups. You know, it's very rarely a huge core fundamental difference. Like even I guess the founding of America was just essentially like one person wanted divorce, which seems like this huge fundamental disagreement in the whole philosophy of religion, but really it's kind of like a small detail now.
Yeah, and from my understanding, all you had to do was believe in a higher power, right? You had to believe in a creator to be a Freemason. And I remember when I was in Grand Lodge of Arkansas that was doing this stuff where, well, they didn't recognize pagans. And I'm thinking, well, there's a lot of pagans that recognize the one God. They just kind of have other little gods underneath it to
that 100% gets onto like the small lodge politics, because a lodge in one town versus a lodge in a town 20 miles away might be completely different, more accepting, less accepting. Like around here, at least, the York Rite, and this might be, you know, nationwide, but York Rite Masonry has a very strong Christian tint to it. So if you're largely uninterested in, you know, Bible tales and the story of Christ and all the details of it, then sometimes the York Rite Masonry might just not be your bag, because so much of that is kind of drenched in Christianity. Whereas the Scottish Rite Masonry, they do kind of leverage more on pagan stories and pagan tales and things that sit outside of Freemasonry or Christianity. And it's kind of interesting because even within the bodies of Freemasonry, there's a schism between the sort of the York Rite and the Scottish Rite in the minds of some people. Just like there's some Masons that are like anti-inebriation, anti-drinking, anti-smoking, and some factions of Freemasonry, like the Shriners, they kind of have developed a persona of being like the drinking club of Masons. So even within Masonry and people that are all Master Masons, they still have these disagreements, even within like the official bodies of the lodge.
Yeah, and this was the Grand Lodge, right, that was doing this stuff of Arkansas, and then they had other states. They were like, well, they were pissed.
Arkansas falls under the southern jurisdiction of Freemasonry, so there's still just a subset of that. Yeah,
and then there were other states that were pissed, like Georgia, other ones. They couldn't believe that the Grand Lodge of Arkansas was being this way, and then they didn't recognize each other. And it's like, oh damn! Now that like this other states aren't recognizing you and stuff, it was weirdly political, you know, like crazy political to me. Maybe it's just a Southern thing. I don't know, man. You know.
No, I think it's a human thing. I don't think it's relegated to any certain part of the country.
Yeah, so that's my point. And then you took the words right out of my mouth. Actually, like that mentality, I think we have also, in the conspiracy world. But like, man, I want to ask you some questions about. I meant to ask you. I get off on tangents, but I meant to ask you questions about some of the other comic books that you wrote about here. Especially, like, I'm really interested in Lee's Demons now, so I want to read that bad after I've read this one. So
yeah, that one's I've been working on for the last 2 or 3 years, and to be honest, it's probably got another 2 years or so until it's completely done. And I'm not sure if I want to release like little chapters of it as I go, or if I just want to wait for all, I think, like 200 pages to be done and release it as a solid book. But yeah, so Lee's Demons, the premise is that Lee Harvey Oswald did shoot JFK, but he shot him because JFK was going to be possessed by sort of voodoo. And I'm saying voodoo in an overly simplistic way here because, it encompasses a large dynamic topic. But the concept here is that Lee Harvey Oswald was raised by Papa Legba, which is sort of this conduit between the world of the living and the world of, the spirits.
Famous in crossroads ritual, right? Yeah,
exactly.
Yep.
So Lee Harvey Oswald gets Papa Legba as his mentor, and Papa Legba sort of teaches him to identify these creatures or these demons or these spirits that have somehow crossed into our world and shouldn't have been. The original title was Lee Harvey Oswald Demon Hunter, which was just a little bit of a mouthful. So now it's Lee's Demons. And it gets fun because we use this dynamic as a way to explain, say, like the magic bullet theory. Well, in this story, it's a magic bullet because he literally performs a magic ritual and creates these, bullets that are able to travel in, magical ways. We explain away that Lee Harvey Oswald traveling all over the country, going to Russia, going to China.
Yeah, I gotcha.
In his military career. Well, this is him training and fighting demons from all different types of folklore across the world.
We got to take a break, but we'll be right back. Stay with us. Boyd, sorry about the programming. I saw it playing the same commercials over and over again. I'm here with Thomas Gorence from Paranoid American, and we're talking conspiracies, victim mentality. And during the break, I want to bring this up too. What were we talking about? Oh yeah. What were we talking about?
Well, we started on NLP.
NLP, that's it.
You brought up your first.
My first experience with NLP.
To NLP was through a very specific sort of niche.
I'll tell this story because NLP is the majority of magic and control, and I would even say dark magic in some ways if you guys want to look at it that way, right? But my first experience with NLP was after my divorce. It was in the early 2000s, and I was in such pain, like from dating and my divorce, that I did not want to go through that again, right? And every guy that's listening to this that's middle-aged understands exactly what I'm talking about. You get to the point where you don't want to like deal with this shit anymore, but you don't want to not date anybody. And it seems like these bastards know, hey, this guy just went through a divorce or he's in pain or whatever. So they hit up your mailbox with like these programs. And I got this program called John Olenis's The King of Let Them Come to You. And the whole idea was to change your whole mindset and to have women just come to you, And I was like, this is crazy. But he had a good sales pitch. I was in pain. I was young and stupid, and I bought it. And I listened to the guy's CDs, and all of his CDs were anchoring, mapping models, NLP, whatever. And I'm like, my heart was breaking, Thomas. Right? I was like, because even to this day, I have a high idea of romance. Right? Please don't tell me there's a science to this or there's formulas to it.
Essentially breaking romance down to used car salesman strategies, right?
Right. And he was like,
high pressure sales tactics applied to the dating world.
Yeah. He was like, so you can get his whole thing was you can attract any woman you want. And I thought about the idea. Well, that's empowering. Right. So he said, so your whole mindset of lack is stupid because if you understand these principles, you can attract any woman you want. because attraction is created for a woman. And then he started making sense, right? He was like, have you ever met a woman that one day she was like, I don't know what I saw in that guy, and woke up the next day, couldn't believe that they did something to that guy. Or you see a super hot chick with some, poor fat guy, or you see some ugly chick with a super successful guy, or like a lot of things that don't make sense, right? Or why the assholes always get the guys and the nice guys never win. And he started explaining all of this stuff. But when he based it down, it was like NLP, maps and models, anchoring, things like that. He would send you on homework assignments to go out and do things to attract women, like do these things to attract them. So he was getting you used to talking to women, number one, and then doing things to attract them. And then he would say, okay, next week, I want you to go out, do these things to attract women, and then do these things to unattract them instantaneously, and watch how this works.
And I assume too that there's sort of a scientific experiment aspect to this, where you're literally taking field notes and you're writing down the strategies that worked, the strategies that didn't, the time of day that it worked, to analyze your patterns. It turns it into a science experiment.
So I was the whole time I was studying this, there was a fascination with, which I think why a lot of people are fascinated with the occult and power and all these things, is because it empowers your life, because you have a greater understanding of things, right? But at the same time, my heart was breaking, because I didn't want to believe this. So I remember going to this bar one time, and there was this like bachelorette party there or whatever, and I did the things. I went after the hottest girl, the one that nobody went after. I did the craziest stuff, the most confident, whatever. All this, I don't have to tell you the details.
You did all the peacocking and the keynote.
Yeah, everything, right? And it all worked. And I won money from my friends that were there and everything else. But I was on a homework assignment that week to like do that and then unattract them, And I remember the girl was leaving the club, and she's like, okay, well, we're going to this club or whatever. It was in Hot Springs, Arkansas. And I told my buddy Bill, I said, now watch this. Watch her face. She's going to be unattracted in a second, and you'll see it in her face, right? So I walked over there to her, and she told me that, and I was smiling. I was like, oh, y'all are leaving? So what do you want me to do? What am I supposed to do? Like I turned into, tell me what to do because I'm desperate. Right? Tell me what to do so I don't mess up. Tell me what to do so I don't lose you. That desperate little dude. And her face just went and just changed. Right? She's like, I don't know. Do what you want to do. And right? And Bill was like, holy shit. And then even this guy told me, he said, don't talk to girls about this because they'll think it's bullshit. Because nobody wants to say we're programmable. But I'm telling you guys, it doesn't matter if you're a girl, woman, doesn't matter. I'm just telling you my experience with this. We are programmable 100%, And so my heart started breaking, like, because this stuff made me sick almost. So when I would get into the later dating realms, I would date girls and then I would tell them about this stuff. Hey, you're doing this because of this, or you're doing that because of this, and that's okay. And they would be like,
that's a mistake.
That's a mistake, right? And I'm thinking, well, if I find a girl that understands this stuff, then that's going to be the girl that I date, right? So I found a couple of girls that understood it, but yet some of the emotional stuff and some of the stuff he talked about still ended up taking over, right?
So that's still sort of like a little arbitrary check mark, though, that you're putting up in your head.
Yeah.
Where like, okay, great, you find someone that's interested in that. That means absolutely nothing compared to all the other check marks that you could possibly be, looking for.
Yeah, and it's like this is literally killing my ideas of romance.
Well, I want to save some of the romance for you in that. And this is just an example of NLP being applied to a very specific human activity. It's weird that it sort of centered around like the dating experience, but NLP, like my introduction to NLP was more in terms of high pressure sales, and it's the exact same
thing though.
Like, there's absolutely no difference to this. The only difference is that in the high sales technique, you're talking about a certain product and you're trying to get someone to be comfortable with the price that you're about to drop on them. In the dating world, you're starting out with just building that same confidence. And a lot of like the really cool NLP tactics go back to like this Miltonian hypnosis and cold reading. So if you even look back into like fortune tellers and clairvoyance and like the waters guys that can like talk to the dead, they use a lot of these exact same techniques, and it's pretty much all just being confident. It's learning how to be a con man, a confidence man.
A con man can, and it's convincing the unconscious mind of the truth that may not be the truth, right? And so this is why, as you read in this guy's book, in the end, when it came to like long-term relationships, he was like, I don't really have long-term relationships. I have, quote, adventure partners, like, some kind of weird new age idea that there was no couple or whatever, that we kind of did our own things and just went on adventures together. And I'm like, yeah, because the concepts of NLP that you're talking about, and I learned this later, only worked on the initial phase of attraction, right? And secondly, if you're using NLP and all of these books that you read and stuff to pick up people and you want a relationship, later down the road, they're going to figure out that you're not actually that person, right? Or something that's not right about
so
it.
If you're looking at it as like this set of, quick little shortcuts, it'll definitely give you results in those little shortcuts. But I think the bigger idea, maybe not within that like section of pickup artists or whatever, but the bigger idea is that you integrate these ideas kind of into your daily life. I kind of equate NLP a lot to martial arts, and which is funny because I think there's a pickup artist guy that wrote a book called The Venusian Arts, as in like a self-defense and like aggressive, like love tactics versus martial arts, which would be in like the like war and whatnot. But to me, it's the same exact kind of concept where you're just learning how that works. And just like if you get into a fist fight, but you're a black belt, I don't know how true this is in all the states, but you might have to consider your hands as like lethal weapons because you know how to use them in ways that other people don't. And I think there's kind of a similar idea in this NLP. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, because this comes up, and I have a horrible time explaining my thoughts on this one, but there's people out there that just naturally have these techniques. They just know them because
like Jim Jones,
whatever reason. Jim Jones, great example, or any number of like really charismatic people. Some kids are just born and they're charismatic right off the bat. It's not like NLP is creating these new ways to program minds. All it is just observing the patterns of highly successful people, breaking it down to a science and saying this is why they're successful, is because they're using these keywords that put people into a more receptive state. They're using body language that puts people into a more receptive state. They're building rapport with people on multiple levels, as opposed to just coming right out of the gate and giving them sales tactics. The whole like, hey, how was your weekend? Like the whole like small talk and, oh, I got a dog too. Oh, you got a dog, man. We're brothers. Now how about this big screen TV? I can get you 40% off, that kind of thing. And another thing that you mentioned a bit about it working in the short term, I think that's why in the sales world it's so popular. Like you don't need to maintain this rapport of NLP with someone after they've walked out of the store with that product.
No, you're done. You're done.
And just like in the dating world, right? Like if you got that number or you got that one date, well, that's great. You're done. But that doesn't mean that you've got the answer to make this like longer lasting, commitment.
Yeah. So, I mean, and secondly, like I was thinking, well, this, like, even today, the stuff breaks my heart, right? A little bit. But I also realized, like, where NLP works magically, like, on me, when I started talking to Andy, and he's like, well, it's really effective if you use it in your own spiritual work, where you're talking to yourself, things like that, on Bob Proctor and all these different things, where you're changing your unconscious. Like, you're not going out and trying to use it against people and things like that. And then I guess another thing that bothered me was like, well, naturally women are on the defensive enough because there really are creeps out there. And we kind of naturally, whether they want to admit this or not, some people get offended, but I don't care. Naturally, we're stronger than them. So women also have to feel safe. So think about the idea of being a human that needs to feel safe. Now there's humans out there that not only they're stronger than you, and some of them are creeps, but they have like this vampirish, like Dracula mental thing over people now because they know all the tricks and stuff. Like, how defensive do you have to be walking around as a woman now,
Well, I'd pose a question is someone that knows these NLP techniques and uses them in daily life, are they any more dangerous or nefarious than someone that naturally has them and doesn't know the name
they're
for
just
them?
as dangerous. Yeah, just as dangerous, right?
Like did Ted Bundy sit down and read all the NLP techniques, or did he just put that shit to use because he just had that ace up his sleeve naturally, you know?
Yeah, and so I think, and also, like, there you go, what you're talking. I think some people do this unconsciously, right? And I have a knack for, like, when I know people are bullshitting me, like, you know, when people are bullshitting you on the street, they're like, yeah, man, what's up, da-da-da, hey, can I get a smoke? And they're trying to act like your buddy. I'll give them a smoke. Those people don't bother me. They're bullshitting me a little bit, but it's like the massive manipulators that I pick up on for some reason that infuriate me because I can see the genius of what they're doing to get their way, right? And I get really upset about it. I'm just telling you, being honest with you here, bro. These are things that I'm struggling with because I see this stuff sometimes, you know? Like,
I mean, if you see it though, does that not mean that you can take yourself out of it? So
no, it doesn't.
Or you just
it doesn't mean you can take myself out of it because, like, if I'm getting pissed off about it, there has to be something that I'm dealing with inside myself, according to the shadow theory of Jung, right?
Right.
Like,
yeah. You've identified something that irritates you about yourself.
Right.
That's,
right.
you know, you looked in a mirror somewhere in the outside world.
Because little bullshit that bothers me, dude, is no problem. You know, even if it's manipulative, it's no problem.
So what's an example of some big bullshit?
Long-term manipulative things where people are so I had an experience in Arizona that and I'm not even sure this person knew that they were doing it, you know, but had been not pretending, but like they had a long-term strategy. Basically, I'll put it to you like this. I'm just going to offend somebody here, right? Instead of like being my friend and supporting me as they said that they did, they had a long-term strategy of running a radio station to impress their ex-wife because they were emotionally unstable. And over the period of 3 years, that's what they needed me for. And I'm like, why the hell didn't... And so I moved everything out to Arizona, right? Like my whole life and everything. And I was thinking, like, why the hell didn't you just tell me this? If you'd have told me this from the initial start, like, hey, man, I want to run a radio station to feel better about myself so I can stop thinking about my heartbreak from my ex-wife, I probably would have packed up and went out there. But this whole, like, bullshit, and there was more to it, too. It's like this whole bullshit thing that happened, like, now I'm trapped out here. And thank God my listeners got me out, right, because we did a fundraiser and stuff. But I also understood this guy's pain because I'd been there before, you know. And it's such an interesting topic to me because it comes down to intent, right? Let's say that you never found out that was the original intent, or let's say that wasn't the original intent. There was, you know, something way more mundane or justified for bringing you out there. It would change the whole perception of that entire event. But just the fact that you found out, oh, this happened because of this, it's so weird how much power knowing what the origin story is can have over things that, you know, could technically have just gone on forever without you knowing about it. And you know what? Like, this dude is a good dude too, man. He's a good dude. He's a good-hearted dude, but he's really, like, self-focused too, you know, in his own world kind of thing. And I think a lot of people are, right? But to the point where there's a salesmanship that comes along with some of these people that is immaculate, man. And a lot of these people are like Jim Jones in a way, and I'm not calling this guy Jim Jones or whatever, but because you can be nice and kind and relate to people, you can manipulate them in the biggest ways.
That's that rapport. It's like the social credit. You know, ignore the technology version of social credit, but the rapport is like that's when you've got such a high opinion of somebody that they can even do a social faux pas or say something offensive or do something in your presence, and you'll still give them the benefit of the doubt and kind of mark it off. But depending on how much rapport you have with that person, like, they can only make so many mistakes in your presence until now, you know, they've lost all credit in your mind. So I would describe these like Jim Jones or Ted Bundy's, these natural guys, for whatever reason, they walk into a room, they've like already got, you know, 100 points of social credit just because of the way that they carry themselves, you know.
So how many secrets?
They can't have it all knocked away from them either.
No, but how many secret societies were created by men like these? how many cults were created by men or women like these people?
Oh, probably every single one, right? No, when it goes to the recruiting aspect, it's the same as like a timeshare, right? Like, how many timeshare salesmen do you think are just insufferable people that have no rapport whatsoever? I mean, they last maybe one day on the job. So it attracts and it retains a certain type of person. Absolutely.
Yeah, and see where they got most people is I mean, even this guy would say this stuff, man, because he could see how furious I was. Right? He'd be like, you look like you're getting a little angry. Are you okay? Like, I'm sensing a little negativity here, buddy. Da, 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 da. And it's like, yeah, you are sensing some anger, negativity, and resentment because you completely wasted my time and my energy and my respect. You completely wasted everything about me. I feel like a dipshit standing here in front of you right now because you didn't like, and I would get to the point where it's like, how do I level off and not get really pissed at this point, right? Because a lot of times people think anger is bad, and that's where a lot of these people get you. They're like, oh, anger is bad or whatever. No. Let me tell you what's bad is someone that holds a lot of anger in, that never lets it out. Like, maybe it's not the healthiest way to let it out vocally in public on somebody or something, right? Maybe you should do it like in a gym, but to hold in anger that's where these people get you. They're like, oh, but you're not being very kind. You're not being very positive. You're not being very whatever. And you're just screwed, even if you know the truth, because everybody agrees with that. Oh, you need to be kind. You need to be positive.
It's a good point.
There's
a little of like a gaslight aspect to that too. And almost like a teasing, mocking aspect to it. But again, I mean, I would go back to the intent aspect where it's a shitty thing. Let's say that you found out someone lured you to, some situation and it was entirely for their benefit, knowing that it was to your detriment. So and I guess in terms of NLP reframing, it would take an NLP master, but to sort of look at it and remove that intent and remove the catalyst that got you there and just analyze it from here's where I'm at. But yeah, I mean, get pissed off, get angry at the person that did that. I don't think there's any like secret magic trick around that.
And the reason why I bring up relationships and money and wealth and things like that is because when it comes to conspiracies, we like to talk about, but we can all relate to these things, right? We can all relate to health, wealth, and relationships because it's what we think about all the time. So if you see someone that's has Stockholm syndrome, that's used to being abused, that makes like excuses for the person that's abusing them. And then you're like, listen, you dumb bitch, you're being abused or whatever. And they're like, you're verbally abusing me. And you're like, it's so mind boggling, right? I'm like, didn't this person just punch you in the face? But you're in the victim mentality against me where I'm telling you the truth. Right. But you see what I mean? Like there's this, it's really weird, man.
There could be an argument made that one person could be the victim mentality, but the other person could have that savior mentality of like, I'm going to come and save you from being this victim, where maybe neither of you in the right position to make a change at that moment,
And this is my point. This is where we circle back around to what I was telling you about is when I start to feel that victim energy in the conspiracy world or any world at that point, like, I'm just like, get it away from me. I don't even have, you know what I mean? Like, I'm so frustrated because I'm mad at myself for being like what you're talking about, that I'm trying to let that pendulum come back and balance. But right now in my life, like I can't deal with it right now.
It's contagious, man. It's very contagious. It's just, negativity, positivity. Both of them are extremely contagious when you're in close proximity to either of them. And it seems infinitely easier to surround yourself with negative energy than it is to surround yourself with positive energy.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. And I did a whole show talking about the mind virus on this, where we brought over the Nazis from World War II. We started human experimentation. They have documents where they literally talk about, it's not just the LSD and everything else, but they literally talk about how to break human beings down, how to break them down to where they hate themselves or they feel like nothing. And then,
it's almost like a scientific formula that you can recreate using, like paint by numbers steps, essentially sleep deprivation, food deprivation, skewing someone's perception of time so they don't know if it's night or day out, and then the aspect of unpredictability. And there's a lot of different ways they do that, but just like random shock torture where you don't know if you're going to get shocked every other second, every other hour, every 4 hours. Once you establish that uncertainty, there's this thing in the human mind that realizes, I can't predict anything going on around me. I can't establish patterns. And, humans and all animals, they kind of live their lives based on patterns that they're kind of detecting. So once you remove that ability to detect patterns, now the human mind is just saying any semblance of order or logic that you throw at me, I will embrace it wholeheartedly. And that's kind of the crux of a lot of that, like MK Ultra mind control trauma base. It's just about breaking someone down into a state where they'll just accept any sort of lifeline that you throw out to them, even if it's like like a literal blade that they have to hold on to.
Yeah, dude. And that is exactly how you start a totalitarian movement. If you want to do it on multiple people, you break them down and put them in fear. So I'm not saying this happened, but let's look at this conspiracy just for a second, because we all have. Let's look at the virus, COVID, and all this other stuff, right? Like, all of the information is still to this day just jumbled up. Nobody knows what's true. There was a fear pandemic. There was, kiss with masks on, don't go outside, don't eat this, don't do that, whatever, right? And at some point we get to this place where someone's like, just tell me what to do. Tell me what to do, because I don't know what to do, right? Like you're talking about. Give me a formula, give me something to tell me what to do, because I can't stand this anxiety of uncertainty.
Yeah, mask on, mask off. You're allowed to do this. You're not allowed to it. Maybe you have to submit to a test at work. Oh, wait, we're going to retract that. Oh, maybe OSHA's going to back it. Oh, no, wait, OSHA's not going to back it. Like the constant uncertainty to some people. Like, if you're looking at it and you don't realize all the dynamics at play, it just looks like a big jumbled mess. But if you think about it in these like programmatic control, almost NLP terms, that sort of establishment of, okay, here's the answer. Oh, wait, that was wrong. Here's another answer. Oh, wait, that one was wrong. Once you do that enough times, you're basically painting this scene where the next thing that makes the most sense, people will latch onto, and that there's a way to kind of foster that mentality.
Yeah. Are you familiar with anarchy at all?
From like my 13 through age 13 through 15 and Rage Against the Machine. And yeah.
Well,
I might have read a little like actual anarchist literature in that time as well.
True anarchy is something profound.
And the Golden Men and things like that.
It seems like it's this rebellious, whatever kind of thing. But
my favorite definition is just the natural state of things.
Yeah. Right.
Like pure anarchy is like that starting point. But then it always, like, once some kind of like structure develops around that, it's no longer anarchy. And it's always like that most virgin initial point is the anarchy.
Well, I consider, there's some dispute there too, right? Because there's a lot of people that wrote about anarchy. And this is just like any other idea where people put their own 2 cents in. So you don't really know the formula of anarchy. But essentially, we all know that it's just like freedom at its ultimate, right? Even to the chaotic point of freedom is what some people think. The version of anarchy that I like is the idea that to be truly free, right, and independent is that you're going to have to face uncomfort and pain. You're going to have to face difficulties and things like that, because when you become in a state of, I want to be free to be comfortable, that's not freedom, really, because you see what happens to us, like that. So anytime we are faced with uncertainty, challenges, things that are hard, or when people try to take our freedoms away or whatever, and we just cave, we don't do anything about it, we don't face anything hard or whatever, this wall of, freedom of comfort. As long as I have my comfort, I'm okay. You could take that away, but as long as I have my comfort, I'm okay. At the same
time, sometimes I look at anarchy as one of those extremist reactionary answers to something. It's the flipping the board game over because it's not going your way, as opposed to trying to restart it within the system, which makes sense in some of those philosophies of anarchy. But I don't know if every single person behind anarchy as a philosophy
No, they
that
don't.
same mentality.
Some
lot
of
of
them
it is just like,
yeah.
I want, I don't want to clean my room. I don't want to get a job. Therefore, anarchy seems like the crew that's going to be most accepting to me.
Yeah, and that's more of the idea of the anarchist of like, I want to be free to do whatever I want so I can be comfortable, right? Because I don't want to do anything that's good for me, So, like, here's the thing. I have taken things from the seeker societies, Freemasonry, the mysteries, nature, and seen the beauty of it, But I've also seen how it can be used to kind of control people in a certain way. I've also seen anarchy as a beautiful thing where there's a natural thing of growing in your freedoms and wanting to be a certain type of free. But then on the other hand, I'm an anarchist because I want to be a rebel and a badass and do whatever the hell I want because I just want to do what I want, and I don't think the true definition of anarchy is what some people think it is. And I don't think Freemasonry, based on what the conspiracy theorists, especially the ones that think Freemasons are like the biggest, evilest people in the world, have any clue what they're talking about either when they say Freemasonry is all about, control and power and stuff, right? So I think there's a balance in both, actually,
I mean, it only takes one personal experience with being in Freemasonic Lodge. And I mean, obviously, that's not even an option for a lot of people. And I don't think anyone would go through the full experience just to have a couple anecdotes. But you sit through a couple lodge meetings and it lets out and you end up eating some lukewarm meatloaf and hearing about people's, lives outside the lodge. And this is not necessarily a collection of people that are running the world. It's a social club. And I don't know. It's such a interesting concept because again, Freemasonry was like the club of all clubs at a certain point. Like it was almost a badge of honor, or a way of proving to the outside world that like I'm a dependable person that does what I say. If I tell you I'm going to do something or I'm going to be somewhere at a certain time, it was like your track record. I joke sometimes it was like your LinkedIn history before there was a concept of LinkedIn. It was a way to see, if this guy's a Mason, I can contact this lodge and I can ask his brothers, hey, is he actually a reputable person? And it was a background check for, anyone to be able to do.
That's kind of why Crowley wanted it, right? Like Crowley wanted to bring his Thelema into Freemasonry so bad. He'd been turned down by so many Masonic lodges because he knew that once he got his school into Freemasonry, that it was going to be considered legit and he was going to have all these new contacts. It was almost like an intelligence move, to me it was.
He was smart in how he rolled these things out because he identified gaps in the market essentially, and he kind of laser focused on that. Like believe he also identified it was either Hermetic Order or the Golden Dawn or one of the ancillary groups, and realized that it was previous to Golden Dawn that it was almost all males. So then he started coming up with, like a co-ed version of this, and it was entirely just on more popularity, more people, more more spread throughout all of it. So I feel like he was, he probably had those NLP sales tactics. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Like the dude could establish rapport with anyone that he came in contact with, even to those people's like literal death,
Yeah. He was like the ultimate, NLP master. I mean, this guy had like 30 to 40 concubines at some times. Right. And then he had the public up in awe. And then he had, anybody that can create their own religion and convince people they're a prophet and then start a mass movement of things based on the fundamentals.
We could bring up Kanye West again.
Yeah, right. But based on the teachings that he learned, though, from just the Hermetic teachings, from just the mysteries, like a lot of the stuff he learned that he adapted upon were the base natural Freemasonic things or Hermetic things or whatever you want to call them. And then he just built upon that. And if you look at like Scientology, all of these different cults and stuff that are really into mysteries, they build upon the idea of the mysteries or Hermetica or whatever, and then build upon their own things. Like I was talking to Anthony the other night about this guy that started, I think it was like the Order of the Thunder or whatever, the guy that had like 75 people kill himself or whatever because he started out with magic, and then he developed his own 12 principles of magic, which had everything to do, that sounded like far more than anarchy, and because he could speak about hermetics, it would awe people. You see what I mean? Like there's something about talking about, I think, about natural law and hermetics that gets people on board and starts moving their soul.
Well, this is one of my a cool topic about the Bavarian Illuminati. There was a translation of Baron von Nige, which was like the second man in command behind Adam Weishaupt, about like actually creating the degrees and soliciting people and getting in there. And he kind of explains it in very layman's terms of how the whole premise of this Bavarian Illuminati was constantly making these outlandish promises of this arcane knowledge that they themselves, like the von Nige, he was writing this, was paraphrasing. He was basically saying like, we don't know any of these secrets. We just know that the Egyptians had this cool ritual where there was like these symbols. So they figured out a way to kind of rewrite that ritual and incorporate those symbols, specifically because they knew that these rich people that had access to all these books, they would be interested if you told them like, oh, I've got this other knowledge that you've never read in a book before because it was passed down through the ancients and only I've got this. And for whatever reason, that like secret knowledge that only I have and you have to talk to me to get it, it is the most alluring sort of sales technique that there is out there. And almost every secret society throughout time employs this sales tactic of, I've got this knowledge that's secret and you have to join my club in order to get this knowledge. It's just such an enticing apple. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. So I think exposing all of this knowledge, I'm not saying some of it's not powerful, right? Some of it's not life-changing, or it's not even spiritual. I mean, dude, I've had out-of-body experiences. I've seen magic work. Synchronicity works. All of these things work. But what I've always worried about from the beginning is how much of an influence it has over people's emotions, number one, right? And what I've seen and personally witnessed people do in my own life, where people are just attracted to this stuff and they put things like on the highest of pedestals. And then when things become human or mundane or stupid, right? It's like a heartbreak. Does that make sense? Like, oh,
yeah, well, it's like the Platonic ideals, right? Like always wanting to see things for like the most perfect version of it that doesn't exist in nature. You know, it's the abstract.
Yeah, you can't have like everybody wants to focus on the rose without seeing the thorns, if that makes sense, right? So a lot of this hermetic stuff it's such a paradox to me, because if you get into like really Rosicrucian philosophy or Hermetic Kabbalah or any of these things, they teach you about all of the negative stuff and self-transformation, and that anybody can open these channels of the Kundalini or whatever you want to call it, chi, that's been called so many things, where you can enlighten your body with this stuff. But if you haven't balanced out your psyche, your psychological problems, your emotional issues, all of these different things, when this force comes in you, it's going to cause major problems, you know, like, and we've shifted away from that. It's like, I don't want to deal with all that stuff. I don't want to deal with that stuff. I want to focus on the rose petals, you know. It's like, well, the rose has to get to that point first. Like, it doesn't just sprout with no seed, with no thorns, with no water, right? With no light, without love and dirt.
And one of my first jobs ever was working at a florist for a few years. And like I've seen the whole process of making, you know, flowers look pretty, from the big box you get from Costa Rica to the final floral arrangement. And I mean, most people, when they talk about a flower, especially a rose, I mean, those things are getting processed by hand so many ways. Like, you're ripping the thorns off. You're typically sticking like a little green metal wire up inside of the bud and wrapping it around the stem so that it stays nice and upright, because regular rose, you give this someone, within a couple hours, it starts to droop over a little bit. Unless you put like some hot water in it to open up, you know, all the cells and get it standing up again. So like, yeah, like we all like to talk about things in the abstract. And again, like that rose that everyone loves, that's that Platonic ideal of a rose, not the actual rose out in the garden. It's got some damaged petals and like a little worm that's inside of it. And, you know, not the perfectly symmetrical shape that people tend to think about when they're thinking about the ideal rose.
I still think, Frater Xavier's, I don't know if you've ever watched, do you know who Frater Xavier is?
I don't know.
Well, he has a magic YouTube channel, but he's got a playlist called Mind and Magic, right? And he's got a playlist called The Mystery School. And I still think that this guy puts it down in layman's terms like nobody else, right? And kind of shows you magic and mysticism, science and religion. Like he's constantly showing you both sides of the coin all the time when it comes to like polarity. Like he shows you the real mysteries, but then shows practical things and how it kind of works in our society. And when I look into a lot of the, like, come on, man, if you go on YouTube or you see a lot of these occult shops and things like that, it's like we're so focused on this the woo idea of magic and things that we are not seeing that there's an actual fundamental tangible thing.
How do I farm some Reddit karma or Instagram likes on the concept of me focusing on intent and will versus here's this really cool video of me burning sage in my, my room and with some like cool background music to it. I think that again, like the spectacles of it tend to be more popular. A lot of people kind of do the magic for the gram sort of thing where it's not necessarily for themselves.
And see, this is why I like ceremonial magic, because I am a romantic. I like the woo. If you like the woo and all this stuff, and you're a romantic, and this is what I've learned about being a magician, because so many things in regular society has broke my heart when it comes to romance, right? But romance, or the rhetoric, or the feminine side of the ritual is very important, right? So you lay the symbols out and all the things that touch the senses and the symbols and everything that makes logical sense to the mind, and then you add the feminine or the romance to it, the movement, the drama, the vibration, and you put the two in one together, and it's a very romantic but also fundamentally powerful hermetic thing that happens in your life, and you're not just like reprogramming your mind, but you're reprogramming your reality in a sense. So and
I would argue some of that feminine energy that you're mentioning in NLP terms, that could be like that anchor. That's that emotion, like that's that attaching this visual or olfactory or like some taste or smell and anchoring it to a certain sort of like mentality.
Exactly, right. And so people are like, well, you're snooty magicians, high magicians. It's like, no, like in Hollywood, they show you in the movies, some guy goes up there and no pun intended, but like abracadabra and the ritual's done, right? Where ceremonial or ritual magicians understood if I make a ritual or ceremony out of this, the more I do it, the more energy I build up, but also the more of the reprogramming that happens in my life, right? Because I'm doing the same things every day and I'm dealing with these energies every day, right? The elements, the masculine, the feminine. I'm doing things. That's what the great work is, right? You don't have
it's like having that, like bouncing a ball back and forth and building that resonance. And after a while, you don't have to exert the same amount of force to keep the ball bouncing. You just kind of,
you get the energy
in
going.
that same sort of momentum.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, and the end of it, you're supposed to be able to just put it all down and you're supposed to be this new person. But it's not about...
And you can fly and you can see through walls and float potions. And
it's literally, the more I read about it, they really believe that you're giving your ego self, the person that you actually think you are, and you're letting that person die. And this is what scares some people, but I don't think they understand it. But maybe I don't understand it. But you're letting that person die so that your higher self can take over, right? So that your higher self leads your life. And you can call it God, Source, Buddha, Holy Guardian Angel, but you let that take over, right? And that's who you're just this vessel for the higher self, which kind of scares people. They're like, well, I got to let all this stuff go, And I don't know, but also there's a conspiracy behind this. Like, but you're opening your body up for demons or to be controlled by interdimensional creatures. And it's like, come on, man. What am I really doing? You see what I mean? Like,
I definitely get lost when it starts getting into the interdimensional galactic demons and lizards. And I don't know, because like you said earlier at the beginning of this, a lot of conspiracy theorists, they might go all in. I'm very much a disappointing skeptic when it comes to a lot of conspiracy theories and paranormal and stuff. I mean, like I'll disappoint almost every listener out there that might think that I'm like, head over heels and believe a lot of this stuff. However, I've got a really deep interest in it, and I like to look into all of like the fine details and find out the parts that really are interesting about it.
Yeah. So I know we only got a few minutes left here. I want everybody to go to paranoidamerican.com and get some of the comic books, but I think you're doing exactly what I'm talking about. I consider what you do magic, because you're taking a lot of the facts, a lot of the symbols, a lot of the understandings of these things, and adding not only creativity, color, what I would call like the feminine or the romantic side of it, but you're also adding humor and all kinds of things into it, which is helping us get a better understanding of these things, but also giving us facts that, like just this one comic book I read, there was a bunch of really cool, nifty stuff in here that I didn't know about, and when I didn't have to read a 3,000 page book, I could just read a comic book and learn about it.
I'm glad you brought that up, because there's definitely an element of that I intentionally put into the comics. So one of the practical examples here is issue 3, I believe, of Time Samplers gets deep into MK Ultra and Project Monarch as it was sort of described by Fritz Springmeier and Cisco Wheeler, which is very dark, very hard to kind of read without coming out on the other end of it feeling really bitter. It's just lots of torture and, like 300 or 400 pages of all sorts of, wild claims. So essentially what I'm doing with these comics is I'm digesting, thousands and thousands of these pages with scattered claims and all sorts of things. And I'm trying to extract the most pertinent, the most sort of interesting elements of that I can kind of crystallize the idea, but also put it into this comic book format so that it's not all doom and gloom. There's a lot of it that's tongue in cheek. There's a lot of sarcasm that I inject into it, because specifically in this world of conspiracy theories, it very much seems that a majority of the documentaries and the books and the articles are very much doom and gloom. And it's all about kind of that victim mentality, as you were mentioning. And like, I'm hoping that some of the comics kind of make fun of it in a way. Like there's this concept of the eugenics movement and this royal bloodline, and how they're, trying to preserve these genetics throughout time and, screw with like the peons that don't have this royal blood. But at the same time, they're kind of inadvertently creating these inbred sort of like royalty,
yeah.
Which is an ongoing joke. I think in the Preacher series, there's a joke where they're trying to recreate Jesus in modern times, and they're trying to use all of like these blood lineages, but every result ends up being this like inbred version of Jesus. So they keep getting like, like ones that aren't quite all there.
You should do one. You should do one about Crowley when he was trying to create the moon child, and that would be funny too. It'd be kind of like the same thing. So in issue 5, we bring Crowley back to modern times, and we haven't done anything with them yet. So actually, that's a great idea. I might have to steal that. Yeah, with all of his different concubines and stuff, and like how they were all plotting against all the other women because the women were getting jealous of each other, and yeah, it was crazy. It's crazy.
I like to keep in mind that they're all humans. Like all these conspiracy theories, at the very end of all of them is some human guy or girl that farts and fucking shits the bed once in a while, just like anyone else, and has embarrassing moments and is susceptible to saying things in anger and getting short with people. I really don't believe that there's been very many humans in existence that were immune to humanity.
We got to get out of here, but man, if you want how can people find you on the web? What's your biggest social media? Is it your Instagram? It is your Instagram.
Is
right?
the only one that I actually entertain. I upload some videos and images there. Otherwise, paranoidamerican.com can check out almost all the books. And then if you go to Amazon and just search for Paranoid American, there's comics, there's books, there's coloring books, there's all kinds of stuff.
Fantastic, man. Well, thanks again for coming on the show, man. It was good to have you back, to get to talk to you one-on-one. I love talking to you with Owen too. But I've talked to him one-on-one a couple of times, so I wanted to talk to you just me and you, and shoot the shit a little bit. So it was fun.
We can go on so many different topics, man. I would love to.
Yeah, I'd love to have you back. And guys, stay tuned for the Secret Teachings with Ryan Gable. We went over just a couple of minutes here, so I thank you guys for your patience. And we'll be back tomorrow night, same time, same channel, right here on the Fringe FM. Good night, guys, and sweet dreams.